Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. Fitzgerald. When, where, the goal, that if that will move her, if you can bounce, high bounce for her too, till she quite lovers, hatted, high bouncing lover, I must have you. Thomas Parky D. Investor. Chapter 1. In my younger and more vulnerable years, my father gave me some advice that I've been turning over in my mind ever since. Whenever you feel like criticizing anyone, he told me, just remember that not that all the people in this world haven't had the advantages that you've had. He didn't say any more, but we've always been unusually communicative in a reserved way, and I understood that he meant a great deal more than that. In consequences, I'm inclined to reserve all judgments, a habit that had opened up in many curious natures to me and also made me the victim of not a few veteran bores. The abnormal mind is quickly to detect and attach itself to this quality when it appears in a normal person, and so it came to about that in college I was unjustly accused of being a politician because I was privy to the secret griefs of wild, unknown men. Most of confidences were unsought. Frequently I have feigned sleep, preoccupation, or hostile levity when I realized by some unmistakable sign that intimate revelation was quivering on the horizon. For the intimate revelations of young men, and not at least terms in which they express them, are usually plagiaristic and marred by obvious suppression, reserving judgment in the matter of infinite hope. I am still a little afraid of missing something if I forget that, as my father snobbishing suggested, and I snobbishly repeated the sense of fundamental decencies is paralleled out unequal at birth. And after bursting this way of my tolerance, I came to the admission that it had a limit. Conduct many founded on a hard rock or wet marshes, but after a certain point, I don't care what it founded on. When I came back from the East last autumn, I felt that I wanted the world to be in a uniform and at a sort of moral tension forever. I wanted no more rigorous excursions with the privileged glimpses into the human heart. Only Gatsby, the man who gives his name to this book, and was exempt from my reaction. Gatsby, who represented everything from which I have an unaffectionate scorn. If personality is not a broken series of successful gesture, then there was something gorgeous about him, some heightened sensitivity to the promises of life, as if he were related to one of those intricate machines that registered earthquake 10,000 miles away. This responsively had nothing to do with that flabby impressionability which is dignified under the name of the creative temperament. It was an extraordinary gift for hope, a romantic readiness such as I have never found in any other person, and which it is not likely I shall ever find again. No, Gatsby turned out all right at the end, and it was preyed on Gatsby, and what a fool! What foul dust floated in the wake of his dreams that temporarily closed my interest in the orbitive sorrows and shore wind. elections of men. My family have prominent, well-to-do people in this Middle-Western city for 3 generations. The Carway are something of a clan, and we have a tradition that descendants are from the Duke of Boscolos, but the actual founder of my line was my grandfather's brothers, who came here from 51 cent substitute to the Civil War and studied the wholesale hardware business that my father carries on today. I never thought that this great uncle and I'm supposed to look like him, with special references to the rather hard-boiled painting that hangs my father's office. I graduated from New Haven in 1950, just a quarter of a century after my father, and a little later I participated in the delayed Teutonic migration known as the Great Wall. I enjoyed the county raid so thoroughly that I came back restless. Instead of being the worn center of the world, Middle West now seemed like wrecked edge of the universe, so I decided to go east and learn the bond business. Everybody I knew was in the bond business, so I suppose it could support one more single man. All my aunt and uncles talked it over as if they were choosing a prep school for me. Finally said, "Why, yes," it was very grave. Huston's face's father agreed to finance me for a year after various delay. I came east, a permanent, I thought, in spring of 22. The practical thing that was found to room in the city was in the warm season. I had just left the country white lawns and friendly trees, so when a young man at the office suggested that we take a house together in a commuting town, sounded like a great idea. He founded the house, a weather-beaten cardboard bungalow, at 8 months, but at the last minute the firm ordered him to Washington, and I went out to the country alone, and I had a dog. At least I had over a few days until he ran away, and an old dog and a Finnish woman who made my bed and cooked breakfast and muttered the Finnish wisdom to herself over the electric stove, and it lonely for a day so until one morning some man more recently arrived than I stopped to me on the road. "How do you get to West Eagle Village?" he asked. Helpless, I told him, and I walked on my lonely no longer. I was a guide, pathfinder, a general settler, and he casually conferred on me the freedom of the neighborhood. And so when the sun shines and the greater bursts of leaves growing on the trees as just things growing just as fast in the movies, I had that familiar conviction that life was being over again with the summer, and there was much to read for one thing, and much fine health, and to pull down one of my young breath giving air. I bought a dozen volumes on banking and credit and investment securities that stood on my shelf in red gold like a new money from the mint, and promising to unfold shining secrets that only Madison Morgan and Maecenas knew. And I had the high intention of reading many other books. Besides, I was rather literally in college. One year I wrote a series of very solemn, obvious editorial for the Yale News, and I was going to bring back all such things into my life and become again the most limited, all specialists, the well-rounded man. And this is such an ephraim. Life is much more successful. Look at the from single window after all. It was a matter of chance that I would have rented a house from one strangest communities in North America, and it was on that slender, righteous island which extended itself due east of New York, and when there was, among other natural curiosity, two unusual formations of land 20 miles from the city, a pair of enormous eggs, identical in contour and separated only a courtesy bay, just out in the most domesticated body of salt water in Western Hemisphere, the Great Wave Barnyard of Lern Island Sound. They are perfect, almost like the egg Columbus stories, and then they both crash flat in the contact end, but their physical resemblance must be a source of perpetual confusion to the gulls that fly overhead. To the wingless and more arresting phenomenon is their dissimilarity in every particular aspect of their shape and size. I live at the West Eggs, while the less fashionable of the two through this most superficial tact to express the bizarre and not little sinister contrast between them. My house was at the very tip of the egg, the only 15 yards of the sound, that squeezing between the two huge places that rented for 12,000–15,000 a season. That was only my right, and colossal affair by any standard. It was a factual limitation of some hotel de ville in Normandy, with a tower on one side, spanking new under and a third beard of raw ivy, and with a marble swimming pool and more than 40 acres of lawn and garden. It was a Gatsby mansion. Or rather, didn't I know Mr. Gatsby was a mansion inhabited by gentlemen of that man? My own house was an eyesore, but it was a small eyesore, and it was being overlooked. So I had a view of the water, a partial view of my neighbor's lawn, and the consoling proximity of millionaires of all $80 a month across the courtesy bar. The white palaces of fashionable East eggs glittered along the water, and the history of the summers really begins on the evening I drove over there to have dinner with Tom Buskins. Daisy's was my second cousin once removed, and I know Tom in colleges, and just after the war I spent 2 days with them in Chicago. Her husband, among various physical accomplishments, and had been one of the most powerful ends, and ever played football at New Haven, a national figure in a way. One of those men reaches some an acute limits excellence 21 that everything afterwards savors of anticlimax. His family were enormously wealthy. Even in college his freedom with money was a matter for reproach. But now he left Chicago and come east in a fashion that rather took your breath away. For instance, he'd brought down a string of ponies from the Lake Forest, and it was hard to realize that a man in my own generation was wealthy enough to do that. Well, why they came east, I don't know. They had spent a year in France, no particular reason, and they drafted here and there unrestfully. Whether people played polo and were rich together. This was a permanent move, said Daisy over the telephone, but I didn't believe it. I had no sight into Daisy's heart, but I felt that Tom wouldn't drift on, ever seeking a little wistfully for a dramatic turbulence of some irrevocable football game. And it so happened that on a warm, windy evening, and I drove over to East X to see two old friends whom I scarcely knew at. There the house even more elaborate than I expected, cheerful, red, white, Georgian colonial man looking over bed. The lawn started at the beach, and ran toward the front door for a quarter of a mile, jumping over sundials and brick walls and burning gardens and fallen. Finally, when it reached the house, drifting up the side in bright vines, as though from the momentum of advance, the front was broken by a line of French windows, glowing now with reflected gold, wide open to the warm windy afternoon. Tom Bergman, riding close, and was standing with his legs apart in front of the porch.